Let's talk about something that's all around us, but we rarely ever see it. It's this invisible framework that lets us trust the people we rely on every single day. Our doctors, the engineers who build our bridges, the people who manage our money. We're talking about professional ethics, and it's what keeps our world from falling apart. So I want to start with a question for you. Just think about this for a second. What do you do when you know for sure that nobody is watching? You see, that little voice in your head, that choice you make in private, well, that's a question of ethics. And when that same question is answered by a professional, someone in a position of real power, the consequences of their answer can ripple out and affect not just one person, but thousands, sometimes even millions. So, what do we actually mean when we say ethics? Well, at its core, it's just a set of moral principles, a kind of rule book that guides how we act. The word actually comes from the Greek ethos, which means character. And that's so fitting because ethics is really about the shared beliefs that define a community's character, what we all agree is the right way to behave. And while different jobs might have slightly different rules, they pretty much all stand on the same foundation. It's built on these core ideas. Things like honesty, being transparent, a sense of fairness, doing your work diligently, and just basic respect for other people. These aren't wild, complicated concepts, right? But they are the absolute bedrock of ethical behavior. And this brings us to a really important idea, the stakeholder. This word forces us to think bigger. A stakeholder isn't just the person you're talking to, it's anyone who is affected by a decision you make, directly or indirectly. It could be your clients, your coworkers, your company, but it could also be society as a whole, or even the entire market. All of a sudden, you realize your actions have a much, much wider blast radius than you thought. Okay, to make this feel a little less abstract, let's walk through a real-world kind of scenario. Imagine a research analyst. Her job is to give people good investment advice. But instead of being totally honest, she decides to write some misleading reports. Why? To drum up more business for her company, which means a much bigger bonus in her pocket. Now, if you only look at the first few minutes after that decision, it looks like there are winners. The analyst makes a bunch of money, her employer gets a nice little bump in business. It almost seems like a victimless crime, doesn't it? Just bending the rules a little for a pretty big reward. But that's just the very first piece of a much bigger, uglier picture. Because here's the real cost, the ripple of harm that spreads out. The clients who trusted her reports, they lose their money. Her colleagues, their professional reputations get dragged through the mud. The employer's brand is now seriously damaged. And even bigger than that, trust in the entire market starts to crack. That tiny, short-term gain for just two parties ends up causing massive, long-term damage for almost everyone else. This is exactly why professions can't just cross their fingers and hope everyone has a good moral compass. They have to build systems, guardrails, to encourage the right behavior and prevent these kinds of catastrophic failures. So how on earth do they do that? Well, there are basically two main tools in the toolkit. First, you've got laws and regulations. These are the top-down rules that come from the government. If you break them, you could be facing fines, maybe even jail time. Then you have codes of ethics. These are different. They're built from the ground up by the professions themselves. They only apply to members of that group, and the punishment for breaking them is professional, like getting kicked out or losing your license to practice. And what makes those codes real are what we call standards of conduct. Now, this part is really important. Standards are not about being a hero. They're not aspirational goals for a perfect world. They are the floor. They represent the absolute minimum level of behavior you have to meet to even call yourself a professional in that field. I know this can still feel a little theoretical, so let's bring it right down to earth. Let's look at a situation that affects pretty much all of us at some point, getting advice about our money. So depending on which rules an advisor follows, they might be held to one of two very different standards. The first is called the suitability standard. This just means they have to recommend a product that is suitable for you. But here's the catch. They could recommend a fund that's perfectly suitable, but also happens to pay them a way higher commission than another, almost identical fund that's actually cheaper for you. And that's totally legal. But then there's the higher fiduciary standard. This says they must act in your best interest. That means they are ethically and legally required to tell you about that cheaper fund because it's better for you, even if it means less money for them. It's a tiny difference in wording, but it has a huge impact on your wallet. And this really gets to the core of what separates a simple job from a true profession. See, it's not just about what you know, it's about how you use that knowledge. A profession is a community that's built on expertise, sure, but it's held together by a framework that is designed, above all else, to create and maintain trust with the public. You can kind of think about it like this. A profession is built on 4 pillars. Of course, you need specialized education and expert knowledge. You have to have a framework for how you do your job. But that final pillar, the one that holds the whole roof up, that's the ethical approach. Without that commitment to ethics, the other 3 pillars just don't really matter all that much. The whole thing becomes unstable. So, when you boil it all down, this is the main takeaway. Ethics isn't some boring list of rules or a dusty old textbook. A real, active commitment to high ethical standards is the absolute foundation of the trust we place in our entire society. In medicine, in engineering, in finance. If that trust disappears, the whole system just crumbles. So I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. The next time you go get advice from an expert, a mechanic, a doctor, a financial advisor, anyone, ask yourself, what standard are they holding themselves to? Because it really is worth knowing if the advice you're getting is just suitable or if it's truly, actually in your best interest. Thanks for watching.